There's a word I'd like to share with you found in the Gospel of Mark, Mark chapter 9. I want to share with you out of verses 14 through 29. Mark chapter 9, verses 14 to 29. Would you stand with me as I read the word of God into our hearing today? I'm reading from the New King James Version of the Bible, and here is how my Bible reads. Mark chapter 9, beginning at verse 14, reading through verse 29. And when he came to the disciples, he saw a great multitude around them, and scribes disputing with them. Immediately when they saw him, all the people were greatly amazed, and running to him, greeted him, and he asked the scribes, "What are you discussing with them?" Then one of the crowd answered and said, "Teacher, I brought you my son, who has a mute spirit. And wherever it seizes him, it throws him down. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. So I spoke to your disciples that they should cast it out, but they could not." He answered him and said, "O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him to me." Then they brought him to him, and when he saw him, immediately the spirit convulsed him, and he fell on the ground and wallowed, foaming at the mouth. So he asked his father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And he said, "From childhood, and often he has thrown him both into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us." Jesus said to him, "If you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes." Immediately the father of the child cried out and said with tears, "Lord, I believe, help my unbelief." When Jesus saw that the people came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "Deaf and dumb spirit, I command you, come out of him and enter him no more." Then the spirit cried out, convulsed him greatly, and came out of him. And he became as one dead, so that many said, "He is dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. And when he had come into the house, his disciples asked him privately, why could we not cast it out?" So he said to them, "This kind can come out by nothing but prayer and fasting." I want to talk this morning about saving our sons. Saving our sons. Among the animal and bird kingdoms, there are certain species that have been classified as endangered by the Department of Interior. This label has been assigned to these species because they've become scarce due to adverse environmental conditions and the insatiable greed of humankind to hunt and destroy them for so-called sporting pleasures. Indeed, many of these species would already be extinct were it not for certain laws and protective measures to ensure their survival. However, endangered species, friends, are not limited to the animal and bird kingdoms. In America and in many other nations for that matter, many humans fall under this same category. But this, friend, should not come as a real revelation. Human life has always been expendable in a world that is bent on war and violence, and in a world that ignores the physical and social needs of many of its inhabitants. And brothers and sisters, there's no greater example of this human neglect than in the case of our black children. To be sure, my friends, the real endangered species of our day, is our black boys, our sons. Now, this is not to diminish the particular problems that our girls are facing, but I really feel led this morning to say a word about the critical condition and the serious situation into which our sons have come. More than 25 years ago, Jawanza Kanjufu, an African-American scholar and educator, has suggested that there is a systematic conspiracy on the part of certain Euro-Americans to destroy black boys. While Kanjufu certainly builds a convincing case, Permit me today, as a minister of the gospel, to take this issue a step further than he by suggesting that there is a conspiracy to destroy black boys, but the ultimate culprit is a member of the invisible community, and his name is Satan. Satan, friends, is out to destroy our children in general and our sons in particular. And as a pastor and a parent, though not of boys, I am greatly concerned about the plight that our sons are facing, because they are at least 50% responsible for our posterity as a people. And might I suggest that unless we as parents and the church become more actively involved in the issue that our sons are facing, we're going to witness the beginning of the extinction of their hopes and of their prospects for a bright and better future. And we're going to continue to live in a world, in a nation, in cities, communities, and neighborhoods that will become more and more unsafe and unstable. While there's quite a bit being said these days by politicians and special interest groups about saving our environment, I want to suggest to you today that our greater concern is that we save our sons. Saving our environment is important, but saving our sons is more crucial. The importance, friends, of saving our sons is highlighted and illustrated in this little passage that I've read into your hearing today. Jesus had been on the mountaintop with his disciples, where he had been transfigured, if you will, in their presence. His concern while on the mountain was for his future suffering on the cross. But now he has come back down to the valley, where his concern was for the plight of ordinary people. And friends, we have in our text an ordinary family that was facing some serious and critical issues. And may I suggest to you today that when we look at this passage, I believe that Mark is teaching us through the experience of Jesus the importance of saving our sons. Notice, first of all, when I look at this passage, I see a child with a problem. Let the church say a child with a problem. Jesus had just come down from the mountain of transfiguration, where he had carried 3 of his disciples, Peter, James, and John. He left the other 9 disciples at the bottom of the mountain, if you will, and now he has come back down to the valley, and among the crowd that had gathered around the 9 that he left behind, there was a distraught father whose son was facing some serious problems. What problems was the boy facing? I'm glad you asked. First, he was a slave of the devil. The Bible says in verse 17 that this boy had a mute spirit. The boy, friends, was unable to hear nor speak. Through demonic possessions, he was experiencing violent convulsions. Now, some believe that this boy's issue was really just a medical or a mental or a chemical issue, that he had a case of epilepsy that could have been caused by either a brain tumor or by a chemical imbalance in his body. But I submit to you today that Mark tells us, no, this was not a case of epilepsy, but rather it was a case of actual demonic possessions. Now, I know we live in this modern age where some people don't believe in the presence of the devil. Some people don't believe that there's a devil, a personal devil, that's somehow some kind of superstitious carryover from the medieval Dark Ages days. But may I stop long enough to tell you this morning, don't you fool yourself, there is a devil. I said there is a devil. Somewhere in the mystical realm of the metaphysical, there exists a diabolic, satanic personification of evil who fell before the fall. Jesus said, I beheld Satan falling like lightning. There is a devil. And may I suggest to you today, friends, that perhaps some of our boys and girls, for that matter, are acting in the ways that they are acting today because, like this boy in the text, their lives are dominated by the devil. No other way to explain why some of our boys are living so wildly but to suggest that they are dominated by the devil. No other way to explain why some of them have no regard for human life and will shoot you down just for looking at them, but to suggest that they are dominated by the devil. No other way to explain why our children, our sons, are armed like gangsters, but to suggest that their lives are dominated by the devil. And may I say today, here was a boy whose life was controlled by the devil. And the devil, friends, wants to get a hold to our children as early as he possibly can while they are still young. And the sins that used to be the sins of adults have now become the sins of children. Middle school children are now alcoholics, and teenagers are now selling drugs. The sins that used to be the sins of adults are now the sins of children. And in verse 21, Jesus asked the father, how long has this boy been in this condition? And the man had to confess, he's been that way, Lord, from childhood. That only tells me that Satan is starting early trying to harm our children, and we need to start early teaching them about Jesus. Now, I know some of you sophisticated 21st century parents say, I don't want to force that religion stuff and church on my children. My parents forced us to go to church. I don't want to force religion on my children. They're not ready for that. But don't you underestimate the intelligence of your child, because that same 5, 6, and 7-year-old child of yours knows the lyrics of every rap song on the market. And if that child can learn the rap song, they can learn about Jesus. If that child can learn the rap song, they can learn the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. If that child can learn the rap songs, they can learn our Father which art in heaven. If that child can learn the rap songs, they can learn now you lay me down to sleep, and I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If the devil ain't waiting, what are you waiting on? This boy was a slave of the devil. But there's something else about this boy. He was self-destructive. Yeah, he was self-destructive. The father said to Jesus in verse 22, said, Jesus, the demons in my boy, often they would throw him into the fire to burn my child, or throw him into the water to drown my child. He said, Jesus, my son is self-destructive. My son is about to destroy his own life. And whenever the devil takes over the life of an individual, one of his goals is to cause the person to become self-destructive. Do you know how it is suggested that Eskimos kill wolves? It is said that they would take a sharp knife, dip it in blood and freeze it. Dip it in blood and freeze it. Dip it in blood again and freeze it until a thick coat of blood is built up on the blade. And then he would stick the butt of the knife into the snow. The hungry wolf smells the blood, finds it, and begins to lick the blood, not knowing that there's a blade beneath the blood. The cold Arctic wind freezes its tongue, causing its tongue to become numb. Now it's down on the blade, on the edge of the blade, and it's cutting its own tongue, ripping its tongue to shreds, and it's bleeding itself. And before it knows anything, the wolf falls over dead. It literally licked its own life away. May I say that that's what happens when the devil gets control of somebody's life. Some of our sons and daughters are licking their own lives away, licking their futures away, getting on drugs, licking their lives away, getting in gangs, licking their lives away in violent activity. This boy, like many of our sons today, are self-destructive. But wait a minute, not only was he a slave of the devil, not only was this boy self-destructive, but he had no sense of destiny. This boy, friends, was going through life without any sense of purpose. He had been marginalized by society. That's what they did in that ancient culture when one was considered to have a condition like his, that they would say that this boy was in that condition because of some sin, either in his life or in the lives of his parents. And so society had pushed him to the margins, if you will. I mean, what employer would hire a boy like this? A boy who was self-destructive, a boy who was a slave of the devil. What teacher in any classroom would want to teach a boy like this? This self-destructive boy, this boy whose life was being controlled by the devil. What teacher would want to teach this boy? Several years ago, I guess when I was living here, there was a little boy they called Johnny, and Johnny had a problem. Johnny wouldn't sit down in class. Matter of fact, his teacher, little white teacher, would tell him, Johnny, sit down, Johnny, sit down. And all day long, like popcorn, he'd sit down and pop back up and sit down and pop back up and sit down and pop back up. And his teacher came to the conclusion that Johnny is a bad boy. And so the teacher decided to go and visit Johnny's mother, to talk to Johnny's parents. Johnny lived in the projects. And when she knocked on Johnny's door, to the door came Johnny's little teenage mother with a baby in her arm and another baby hanging on her legs. She walked inside of Johnny's house, only to discover when she looked around that there was no furniture in his house, that the only furniture there was an orange crate and a television. And that's when the light came on for his teacher, that's why Johnny won't sit down. It's not that Johnny is a bad child. Johnny just doesn't have a concept of what it means to sit down. Kanjufu says that you cannot teach a child that you do not love. You cannot teach a child that you do not respect, and you cannot teach a child that you do not understand. And that's the problem with our children today and teachers today. They don't love them, they don't respect them, and they cannot understand them. Oh, there it is. A child with a problem. But wait, there's something else I see in this passage. That is, I see a concerned parent. Can the church say a concerned parent? Matter of fact, as we peruse and walk through the avenues of this passage today, this little episode, as it unfolds before us, we notice several groups of individuals that come into focus in this passage. Verse 14 talks about the scribes. It says that the scribes were disputing with Jesus' disciples. The 9 that he had left behind, the scribes were down there arguing and debating with the 9 disciples about this boy. The scribes were experts in matters of the law. They were experts in interpreting the Mosaic law. And the scribes represent the experts today. And look at what the experts were doing about the problem. They were debating the problem. That's what the experts are doing today. When they look at the plight of black boys and girls, they are just debating the problem. They don't have any answers to the problem. They got debates. They write master's theses and doctoral dissertations about the problem, but they don't really have any answers for the problem. Are you with me today? Brothers and sisters, but wait, not only do you see that the scribes, the experts were debating the problem, but in verse 18, another group comes into focus. Verse 18 says that the man said to Jesus, Lord, I spoke to your disciples that they should cast the demons out of my boy, but they could not. Now look at this, child of God. The scribes, the experts were debating the problem, but the disciples represent the church, and the church was dormant about the problem. He said, Lord, I brought my boy to your church to get some help, but they could not. What a sad commentary on the church. they could not. Maybe we need to rename some of our churches. The so-and-so Baptist church that could not. Our churches can build buildings and raise budgets and baptize, but when it comes to the plight that our sons and daughters are facing, the sad reality is they could not. Wait. Not only do you notice the scribes, the experts were debating the problem, and the church was dormant about the problem, but there's another group that comes into focus in verse 15. Verse 15, Mark says, and all the people were greatly amazed and running to him. When they saw Jesus coming down from the mountain, all the people went running to Jesus. Now, all the people, the crowd, represents society. So while the experts debated the problem and the church was dormant about the problem, the society tried to distance itself from the problem, because when they went running to Jesus, they were running away from the boy. Are you with me here today? Oh, brothers and sisters, society is still today trying to put a healthy distance between itself and the problem. Oh, it's doing it. It's been doing it for generations, putting it a distance between itself and the problem. We see how society distances itself from the problem of our black boys and brown boys and girls back in Nixon's Southern strategy, where Nixon says we need to declare a war on drugs. It was a code word for lock up black boys, lock up brown people. Are you with me here today? And then Clinton came along and reinforced it with 3 strikes and you're out. And now you've got black and brown people serving long prison sentences for non-violent crimes. Society don't want to deal with the problem. It wants to distance itself from the problem, so lock them up. But society is putting the distance between itself and the problem in another way, by warehousing our children in special education. Because society don't want to deal with the problem. Our children are not dumb. Some of them just need a hot meal. Our children are not dumb. Some of them just need somebody to hug them and tell them, I believe in you. Do I have a witness here? But wait a minute, there's another group. While the experts were debating the problem and the church was dormant about the problem and society was distancing itself from the problem, another group shows up in verse 17, and that's the father. The father said to Jesus, Teacher, I have brought my son to you. The father made a decision about the problem. He said, Lord, I have brought my son to you. He said, I'm not waiting on the experts to solve my child's problem. I have brought my son to you. I'm not even waiting on the church to do it all for me. I have brought my son to you. I'm not waiting on the government to write some program to help my child. I have brought my son to you. Brothers and sisters, we have here a father who took the initiative to help his own child. There is no substitute for a concerned parent that will take the initiative to help their own children. We cannot expect others to do for us what we ought to do for ourselves. This father would not give up on his son. I don't know who I'm talking to today or why the Lord put this message on my heart to preach it today, but maybe I'm talking to a parent or a grandparent or to an uncle or to an aunt or to a brother or sister today that has a wayward child, a wayward son, a wayward daughter or grandchild today. I want to tell you today that even if society gives up on your child and pushes them to the margins, whatever you do, don't you ever give up on your child, because as long as there's breath in their body, there's a chance that God can turn their lives around. There it is. A child with a problem, a concerned parent. But there's one last movement, and I'm in my seat. And that is a Christ who has power. Let church say Christ has power. Oh, this proactive father brought his son, if you will, to Jesus. Jesus did 2 things. First thing he did was for the man, and the second thing was for his disciples. First thing he did for the man was he cultivated the man's faith. Jesus lamented in verse 19, "O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring the boy to me." Jesus asked the father, "How long, man, has this been happening to your son?" The man said, "From childhood." Well, listen to what the man said to Jesus in verse 22. "But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us." The man asked Jesus if he had the power. And Jesus turned around in verse 23 and asked the man if he had the faith. He said, "If you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes." He said, "Man, the issue is not, do I have the power? Because God knows I've got the power. Look at my resume. I'm Lord of the Christian, Lord of the church, Lord of the creation. I've got the power. If you need some references, ask my disciples. I healed the sick, raised the dead, unstopped deaf ears. I've got the power. The question is, do you have the faith?" May I say to you, brothers and sisters, that our faithlessness is often the problem of our not having answered prayer, is our lack of faith. The man's faith began to grow just a little bit. Listen to the man as he laments with tears in his eyes, "Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief. Lord, when I look at you, I do believe. But when I look at my boy, got to be honest, I don't believe. I like this man because he's honest. And he's a picture of every one of us, suspended between I do, but I don't. I can, but I can't. Do I have a witness here? But the man's faith grew enough for the Lord to draw from him a little faith. And the Lord saw a little faith and healed the man's son. Ain't it amazing what God can do with a little faith? He said if you had the faith the size of a grain of mustard seed, you could speak to your mountain and tell your mountain to be removed. Do I have a witness in here? I know we used to sing that old song, "Now Lord, don't move my mountain, but give me the strength to climb." Baby, God ain't never told you to climb the mountain. He tells you to exercise your faith and speak to your mountain and tell your mountain to get out of your way. Jesus cultivated the man's faith. But wait, he corrected his disciples' failures. Verse 28, the disciples were so embarrassed because they couldn't cast the demons out of the boy that they wouldn't ask it in public. They waited until they got home in private and said, "Lord, why could we not cast this demon out of this boy?" And Jesus says to them in the closing line, said, "Fellas, don't worry. This kind, what this boy has, this boy's condition, can only come out by prayer, but not just prayer, an intensified, focused kind of prayer and fasting." Do I have a witness here? Sometimes you got to turn your plate over. You got to turn that television off and get on your knees and take your child to the Lord in prayer. Because when you can't reach them, God can. When you can't get their attention, God can. When you cannot turn them around, God can. Do I have a witness in here? You've heard the saying, and it is true, much prayer, much power. Little prayer, little power. No prayer, no power. Let me see how I can get out of here. When my two girls were born, I was in the delivery room with both of them. I almost fainted, but I was there. My wife was ready to give birth both times. Already had dilated 10 centimeters. And the doctor said to my wife, "Janice, push!" my wife's a good-looking woman, but Pastor, she got ugly. Face was contorted. Hair was in unkempt disorder. Didn't care about how her makeup was looking. And she would grunt. Ugh. And the doctor kept saying, push! And she said, I'm tired, I can't push. She said, if you stop pushing, the baby is not going to come. So you got to push. Am I talking to some parent today that's got a child that's wayward, that won't listen to you, that's acting a fool? I've come to tell you today, get in the birth position, get down on your knees, and push. Because push means pray until something happens. Push. I know it's rough. I know it's tough, but push. That problem that I had, I just couldn't seem to solve. I tried and I tried, but I kept getting deeper involved. But when I turned it over to Jesus, I stopped worrying about it. I turned it over to the Lord, and he worked it out. Push. Pray until something happens. If you receive it, give the Lord praise.